What if I told you that right now, while you're listening to this, an algorithm is scanning your browser history, analyzing your search patterns, and calculating whether your particular brand of existential confusion makes you suitable for humanity's most ambitious backup plan? What if what's the meaning of life? Google search at 3 a.m. wasn't a cry for help, but actually a job interview for becoming an interplanetary pioneer? Not another social media alert or spam email. No, this is different. This is Elon Musk personally selecting you to be one of the first humans to colonize Mars. But here's the thing that'll keep you up tonight. What if I told you this isn't just a fantasy? What if the universe's greatest cosmic joke is that while you're worried about your mortgage, your relationship status, or whether you remember to feed your cat, somewhere in a Tesla factory, an algorithm is actually analyzing your digital footprint to determine if you're Mars material? Think about it. Every embarrassing Google search, every philosophical midnight tweet, every time you stood in your kitchen at 3 a.m. eating cereal and wondering if this is all there is. What if that's exactly the kind of existential awareness they're looking for? What if your quarter life, midlife, or whatever life crisis is actually your qualification? See, we spend our entire lives trying to figure out our purpose, scrolling through LinkedIn watching everyone else seemingly have their shit together, while we're over here Googling, is 32 old to start over? Or how to know if you're living your best life? But what if the cosmic punchline is that the people who question everything, who lie awake wondering if we're just specks of dust in an infinite universe, are exactly who we need to represent humanity among the stars? I mean, consider the beautiful absurdity of human existence for a second. We're literally walking bags of water and carbon who somehow develop the ability to contemplate our own mortality while simultaneously creating rockets that can escape our planet's gravitational pull. We went from throwing rocks at mammoths to throwing ourselves into space in just a few thousand years. And now we're seriously discussing turning another planet into our backup hard drive. The question isn't whether you're qualified to go to Mars. The question is, in a universe where nothing really matters and everything matters simultaneously, where we're all just improvising our way through this cosmic comedy show, wouldn't the biggest plot twist be that ordinary, confused, beautifully flawed humans like us are exactly what the next chapter of human evolution needs? So buckle up, because we're about to explore what happens when the universe's most ambitious entrepreneur decides that your particular brand of existential confusion might just be humanity's ticket to the stars. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll never look at your mundane Tuesday the same way again. The email arrived on a Thursday, because apparently life-changing moments have a thing for ordinary weekdays. You know how some people claim they always knew they were destined for greatness? Yeah, well, you were currently wearing yesterday's sweatpants, eating leftover pizza for breakfast, and having a very serious internal debate about whether checking your bank account would ruin your entire day. Congratulations, your name. You have been selected for the Mars Colonial Program. Report to SpaceX Facility 7 within 72 hours. Bring nothing. We'll explain everything. Your first thought wasn't excitement or terror or even confusion. It was, this has got to be the most elaborate scam in human history. Because let's be honest, if aliens were studying human behavior, they'd probably conclude that our species' greatest talent is assuming the worst possible scenario in any given situation. But then you notice the email came from an official SpaceX domain. Then you saw the attached documents with more government seals than a bureaucrat's wet dream. Then you realized your hands were shaking, and not just from the 3 cups of coffee you'd already consumed while avoiding your actual responsibilities. The thing about extraordinary moments is they never feel extraordinary when they're happening. They feel surreal, like you've accidentally wandered into someone else's movie. You spent the next hour Googling, is this real? And Mars mission selection criteria, and can I sue SpaceX if this is fake? Because apparently your brain's defense mechanism against life-altering news is research paralysis. By hour 2, you were deep in a Wikipedia rabbit hole about Mars colonization, learning that the average temperature is -80 degrees Fahrenheit, and thinking, great, I complain when my apartment drops below 70. By hour 3, you were calculating how many episodes of your favorite show you could binge watch before having to make a decision that would literally change the trajectory of human civilization. Here's what nobody tells you about being chosen for humanity's greatest adventure. The paperwork is absolutely ridiculous. Apparently, even when you're about to become an interplanetary pioneer, someone still needs to know your emergency contact information and whether you've ever been convicted of a felony. The forms ask questions like, rate your comfort level with isolation on a scale of 1 to 10, and describe your relationship with your family in 500 words or less. As if there's a standardized test for, will this person go insane when they realize they're 140 million miles from the nearest Starbucks? But the weirdest part? The psychological evaluation section. Instead of asking about your fears or mental health history, it was full of questions like, when you look at the night sky, do you feel connected to something larger? Or do you mainly worry about your mortgage? And if you discovered that life has no inherent meaning, would you A, have an existential crisis, B, shrug and make your own meaning, or C, start a podcast about it? It was like someone had been reading your browser history and decided that your 3 a.m. philosophical spirals were actually qualifications rather than character flaws. Your search history of what's the point of anything and are we alone in the universe suddenly seemed less like symptoms of depression and more like cosmic preparation. The selection criteria, as it turned out, weren't what anyone expected. They weren't looking for astronauts. NASA already had those. They weren't looking for scientists. Universities were full of those. They were looking for what the documentation called existentially curious individuals with high adaptability quotients and humor-based coping mechanisms. Basically, they wanted people who could question everything, adapt to anything, and find something to laugh about while doing it. Because here's the thing about colonizing Mars that all the science fiction movies get wrong. It's not about the technology. Humans are incredibly good at figuring out how to not die in hostile environments. We've been doing it for millennia. What's hard is maintaining your sanity when you're living in what's essentially a very expensive tent on a planet where the atmosphere is 96% carbon dioxide, and the social scene is limited to whoever else was crazy enough to leave Earth behind. They needed people who were already comfortable with existential uncertainty, who had already wrestled with questions about purpose and meaning and come out the other side still functional. They needed people who could look at a red, barren wasteland and think, well, this is different. Instead of, oh God, what have I done with my life? As you sat there, staring at the acceptance documents that would make you one of humanity's first Martians, one thought kept circling back. Maybe all those years of feeling like you didn't quite fit into Earth's standard operating procedures weren't a bug. They were a feature. Facility 7 looked exactly like what would happen if Apple designed a government building. All clean lines and minimalist aesthetics, but with an underlying sense that very serious people in very serious suits had very serious meetings about the placement of each potted plant. You half expected someone to ask if you'd like to upgrade your Mars experience for an additional monthly fee. The orientation group was interesting. There was Sarah, a philosophy professor who'd spent her career teaching students that life was meaningless, which apparently made her perfect for helping establish meaning on a planet where the closest neighbor was a rover named Curiosity. There was Marcus, a stand-up comedian whose career had peaked at moderately successful, but whose ability to find humor in disaster was rated exceptional by SpaceX's psychological evaluation AI. Then there was David, a former accountant who'd had what he called his spreadsheet epiphany. The moment he realized that all the numbers he'd been organizing his entire life didn't actually add up to anything meaningful. So he quit his job to become a wilderness survival instructor. Apparently, Excel skills and existential crisis recovery were exactly what Mars needed. The group looked like what you get if you put quarter-life crisis support group into an AI image generator and added, now with 100% more rocket science. Everyone had that same slightly bewildered expression. The look of people who'd spent their lives feeling like they were missing some crucial instruction manual for human existence, only to discover that maybe the instruction manual was overrated. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the mission psychologist, explained the selection process with a kind of clinical detachment that made you wonder if she'd been practicing this speech in the mirror. Traditional astronaut selection focuses on technical competency and stress resistance, she said, clicking through a presentation that probably cost more than your college education. But colonization requires something different. It requires people who can create meaning in meaninglessness, find community in isolation, and maintain hope in the face of cosmic indifference. She paused, looking at each of you in turn. Congratulations. You all tested positive for existential resilience. Existential resilience. That was a new one. Apparently, all those nights you'd spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if your life had any purpose, if your decisions mattered, if you were just a random collection of atoms that happened to develop consciousness. All of that philosophical suffering had been training. Like CrossFit for the soul, but with more crying and less Instagram posts about your workout routine. The training program was unlike anything you'd imagined. Sure, there was the expected physical conditioning, technical training, and survival skills. But there was also what they called meaning-making workshops, where you practiced finding purpose in mundane tasks. One exercise involved organizing a supply closet for 6 hours while contemplating whether the act of organization itself was meaningful, or whether meaning was something you brought to the organization, or whether the whole concept of meaning was just a human construct that would become irrelevant once you were living in a pressurized dome on a planet where the dust storms could last for months. It was like philosophy graduate school, but with better funding and a lower chance of ending up in debt working at a coffee shop. The humor training was equally surreal. Marcus led sessions on finding comedy in cosmic horror, teaching everyone how to identify the absurd and the terrifying. When you're watching Earth disappear behind you, he'd say, gesturing wildly, you can either have an existential breakdown, or you can appreciate the cosmic joke that humans are so uncomfortable with their home planet that they're willing to move to a place where breathing the air will literally kill them. The group dynamic was fascinating in the way that social experiments are fascinating, equal parts enlightening and disturbing. You were all there because you'd already questioned everything about conventional life and found it somewhat lacking. You were the people who'd looked at society's standard metrics for success, money, status, stability, and thought, but what's the point? Now you were bonding over the shared experience of being selected for humanity's most ambitious backup plan. During one particularly intense group therapy session disguised as mission readiness training, Sarah posed a question that had been bothering everyone. Are we explorers, or are we refugees? Because there was something uncomfortably apocalyptic about the whole enterprise. Yes, Mars colonization was about expanding human civilization and ensuring species survival. But it was also about acknowledging that Earth might not be viable forever, and that maybe, just maybe, we'd screwed things up badly enough that we needed a Plan B planet. Both, Dr. Vasquez answered, with a kind of philosophical certainty that only comes from having a PhD and government clearance. Human civilization has always been about moving towards something better and away from something worse. The frontier has just gotten a bit more frontierish. The technical training revealed just how much of space colonization was essentially very expensive camping. You learned to fix air recycling systems, grow vegetables in artificial soil, and perform basic medical procedures on yourself, because the nearest hospital would be approximately 140 million miles away during optimal orbital alignment. You practiced living in confined spaces with the same people for months at a time, discovering that personal hygiene becomes a community concern when you're sharing recycled air. But the most important training wasn't technical, it was psychological. Learning to find wonder in the mundane, purpose in the arbitrary, and community in isolation. Learning to look at a red, empty landscape and see potential instead of desolation. Learning to accept that you were about to become a character in humanity's most ambitious story, even though you still felt like you were making it up as you went along. As the weeks passed, something strange happened. The group of existentially confused misfits started feeling like a team. Not because you'd found all the answers, but because you'd all accepted that the questions were more interesting than the answers anyway. You were about to become humanity's representatives to the cosmos, carrying all our doubts, hopes, and cosmic confusion to another world. And somehow, that felt exactly right. Launch day arrived with the kind of mundane surrealism that seems to follow all historically significant moments. You woke up in a sterile dormitory room, brushed your teeth with government-issued toothpaste, and ate what the cafeteria optimistically called eggs, while knowing this was probably the last terrible institutional breakfast you'd ever have on Earth. The thing about making history is that it feels exactly like not making history right up until the moment when you're strapped into a rocket and someone starts counting backward from 10 in a very serious voice. Even then, part of your brain was convinced this was all an elaborate prank, and at any moment someone would jump out and yell surprise. You're actually just going to work at a really weird office in Nevada. But no, the countdown was real. The rocket was real. The fact that you were about to become one of the first humans to leave Earth with no intention of coming back was very, very real. How are you feeling? Asked Marcus, who was strapped in next to you, looking exactly like someone who'd spent his career making jokes about situations that weren't supposed to be funny and was now in the ultimate not supposed to be funny situation. Like I'm about to find out if all those years of questioning everything were actually preparation for this moment, or just a really expensive form of procrastination, you replied. Sarah, across the compartment, laughed. Same thing, really. Procrastination is just delayed decision-making. And we've been delaying the decision about what it means to be human until we could test it on another planet. The launch itself defied every expectation you built up from movies and documentaries. It wasn't graceful or transcendent or spiritually transformative. It was violent and loud and felt exactly like what it was. A controlled explosion designed to throw you away from everything you'd ever known at approximately 25,000 miles per hour. Your entire body felt like it was being pressed through a cosmic pasta maker while your consciousness tried to catch up with the physics of the situation. But then, suddenly, there was silence and weightlessness. And through the small porthole window, you could see something that no amount of National Geographic documentaries or Carl Sagan quotes could have prepared you for: Earth, looking exactly like all those photos you'd seen, except now it was real and getting smaller, and you were no longer on it. That's when the existential crisis hit, right on schedule. Here's what nobody tells you about leaving Earth. The planet looks incredibly beautiful and impossibly fragile from space, like a cosmic marble that someone's cosmic toddler left balanced precariously on the edge of a cosmic table. Every human who had ever lived, every story that had ever been told, every problem you'd ever worried about, it was all contained in that small blue sphere that was rapidly becoming a memory. Your childhood home was down there somewhere. Your favorite coffee shop. That park where you'd had your first panic attack about the meaninglessness of existence. The office building where you'd spent countless hours wondering if there was more to life than this. All of it, shrinking into a point of light that would soon disappear entirely. Well, said David, the former accountant, staring out another window, I guess this is what they call putting things in perspective. The journey to Mars takes approximately 6 months, depending on orbital mechanics and how you define approximately. 6 months in a space roughly the size of a very expensive RV, with the same 5 people, eating food that had been optimized for nutrition and shelf life rather than taste or psychological comfort. 6 months of looking out at an endless void punctuated by distant stars that remained distant no matter how fast you were traveling toward them. The daily routine was designed by people who understood that human beings need structure to maintain sanity, but who had perhaps never considered what happens to sanity when that structure takes place in a metal tube hurtling through the vacuum of space. Morning exercises on equipment that worked in zero gravity. Educational sessions about Mars geology and atmospheric composition. Group therapy disguised as mission briefings. Meals that came in packages and tasted like they'd been designed by aliens who had heard about food but never actually experienced it. But the most important part of each day was what Dr. Vasquez had called meaning-making time. 2 hours when you were supposed to contemplate your role in human civilization, your relationship to the cosmos, and what it meant to be consciousness experiencing itself subjectively while traveling between planets. It sounded profound in the mission briefings. In practice, it felt a lot like being forced to have an existential crisis on schedule. Week 3 was when the real psychological challenges began. The novelty of being in space had worn off, Earth was no longer visible, and Mars was still just a slightly reddish that required a telescope to see properly. You were suspended in the ultimate middle of nowhere, with nothing to do but think about the choices that had led you to this point. That's when Sarah started what became known as the Cosmic Perspective Sessions. Every evening, the group would gather in the small common area and discuss questions like, if consciousness is just an emergent property of complex chemical reactions, and we're currently transporting our particular arrangement of chemical reactions to another planet, are we exploring space, or is space exploring itself through us. These discussions had a quality that was part philosophy seminar, part group therapy, and part late-night college dorm room conversation, except with significantly higher stakes and no pizza delivery option. You talked about whether human civilization was an inevitable result of evolutionary pressure or a cosmic accident, whether intelligence was common in the universe or so rare that you might be carrying the only examples of it from Earth to Mars, whether the act of leaving your home planet made you more human or less human. Marcus, true to form, found ways to make even cosmic insignificance funny. The universe is 13.8 billion years old, he'd say, and somehow we've convinced ourselves that the most important thing happening in it right now is whether we can figure out how to grow tomatoes in Martian soil. That's not cosmic insignificance, that's cosmic comedy. By week 8, something interesting started happening. The group began to develop what could only be described as a collective cosmic perspective. You stopped seeing yourselves as individuals who happened to be traveling together and started feeling like a single organism that had somehow convinced itself it was 5 separate people. Your jokes became shared jokes. Your anxieties became shared anxieties. Your sense of wonder at the absurdity of the situation became a shared appreciation for the ultimate punchline of human existence. The psychological transformation was subtle but profound. You'd started the journey as people who felt disconnected from conventional human society, and now you were becoming the foundation of a new kind of human society, one based on shared uncertainty, collaborative meaning-making, and the understanding that in a universe this vast and strange, the most reasonable response might just be laughter. As Mars grew from a dot to a disk to a world, you realized that the real journey hadn't been the physical transportation from one planet to another. It had been the mental journey from feeling like misfits in human civilization to becoming the advanced scouts for the next phase of human evolution. And that evolution, apparently, was going to involve a lot more philosophy and significantly fewer reliable food delivery options. Landing on Mars was like attending your own birth. Violent, disorienting, and followed by an immediate need to figure out how to breathe in a completely new environment. The descent module hit the Martian atmosphere with all the grace of a cosmic belly flop, and for 12 minutes of what the technical manuals euphemistically called atmospheric entry, you experienced every emotion simultaneously while being shaken like dice in a cup held by a very enthusiastic giant. Then, suddenly stillness, silence, and the realization that you were no longer in space. You were on another planet, not visiting, living. The first step on a Martian soil was supposed to be profound and historic. Instead, it felt like stepping into the world's most expensive sandbox. The gravity was different, lighter, but not in a fun, bouncy way. More like someone had turned down the universe's background pressure just enough to make everything feel slightly off, like wearing shoes that were almost the right size. "Well," said Marcus, looking around at the red, rocky landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction. "It's exactly as advertised. Desolate, inhospitable, and completely lacking in decent Wi-Fi infrastructure. The base camp was a marvel of engineering and a testament to humanity's ability to create temporary civilization anywhere, a collection of interconnected domes, solar arrays, and equipment that looked like what would happen if IKEA designed a space station and included really detailed assembly instructions. Everything was functional, efficient, and designed by people who understood that survival was more important than comfort, but who had apparently never considered that psychological well-being might be related to not feeling like you're living inside a very expensive camping equipment catalog. The daily routine on Mars was like Earth routine, but with extra steps and potentially fatal consequences for forgetting them. Check atmospheric seals. If you skip this, you'd suffocate. Monitor radiation levels. Ignore this, and you'd develop very interesting cellular mutations. Maintain equipment. Negligence here meant everyone dies in creative and uncomfortable ways. It was like adult life, but with clearer cause and effect relationships. But here's what no amount of training had prepared you for: the silence. Mars is quiet in a way that Earth never is. No birds, no insects, no distant traffic, no neighbors arguing, no random dogs barking at 3 a.m. Just wind, and even that sounds different in an atmosphere that's 96% carbon dioxide. It's the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, your own consciousness existing in a place where consciousness had never existed before. After the first month, something unexpected happened. The group started to settle, not just physically, but psychologically. The daily routine of survival became familiar, then comfortable, then oddly satisfying. Growing vegetables in artificial soil turned out to be remarkably rewarding when those vegetables were literally the difference between life and death. Maintaining life support systems gave every technical task a clarity of purpose that most Earth jobs never achieved. Sarah started what became known as the Martian Philosophy Project. Daily sessions where you'd sit outside in the environmental suits, watching the sunset, which was blue on Mars, because physics has a sense of irony, and discuss what it meant to be human in a place that had never had humans before. Were you explorers, colonists, refugees, or pioneers? Were you extending human consciousness into the cosmos, or just postponing the inevitable by 140 million miles? The beautiful thing about being on Mars, Sarah said during one of these sessions, is that all the social constructs that seem so important on Earth, status, wealth, career success, they're completely irrelevant here. We've been reduced to the essential elements of human existence: survival, curiosity, and the search for meaning. It's like we've accidentally created a philosophical experiment with the highest possible stakes. David, who had discovered that his accounting skills were surprisingly useful for managing life support resources, had become the group's unofficial logistics coordinator and philosophical accountant. I spent years organizing numbers that represented money, that represented value, that represented status, that represented what exactly? But here, every number means something concrete. Oxygen levels, water recycling efficiency, power consumption. It's all directly connected to whether we continue existing or not. It's incredibly clarifying. The humor evolved too. Earth jokes stopped being funny. They relied on shared cultural references that felt increasingly remote. Instead, you developed a distinctly Martian sense of comedy based on the absurdity of your situation. The fact that you were growing food in sterilized dirt on a planet where the atmosphere was poisonous became hilarious. The way Earth appeared as a tiny blue that was impossible to distinguish from other stars was cosmic comedy gold. Marcus started an evening routine called Mars Stand-Up, where he performed comedy sets about the experience of being humanity's first interplanetary immigrants. You know you're really committed to a new living situation when the commute back to your old place takes 6 months and requires a rocket ship. And don't even get me started on the neighborhood. It's very quiet. The views are amazing, but the social scene is extremely limited. But the most profound change was how the group started to see itself. You weren't just 5 people who happened to be on Mars together. You had become something new, a small, conscious part of the universe that had somehow convinced itself to relocate to a different part of the universe and was now trying to figure out how to thrive there. The nights were the most philosophical times. The Martian sky, unpolluted by atmospheric interference or light pollution, revealed stars in a clarity and abundance that Earth dwellers never experienced. You could see the Milky Way not as a faint smudge, but as a river of light containing hundreds of billions of stars, each potentially warming planets that might contain life forms having their own existential discussions about the meaning of consciousness in an infinite universe. We're not just the first humans on Mars, you realize during one of these stargazing sessions. We're the first Earth life forms to establish a self-sustaining presence on another planet. We're life itself, expanding beyond the boundaries of where life originally evolved. We're not just making history, we're continuing evolution by other means. The weeks turned into months, and Mars started to feel less like an alien world and more like home. Not Earth home, but a different kind of home. A place where human consciousness had learned to exist in harmony with cosmic indifference, where survival required constant attention to the fundamental facts of existence, and where every day was simultaneously routine and miraculous. As you settled into your first Martian winter, watching ice crystals form on the dome windows, while monitoring life support systems that kept you alive in an environment that was utterly hostile to your form of life, you realized something profound. Maybe the point of human existence wasn't to find meaning, but to create it. And maybe the ultimate act of meaning creation was taking consciousness itself and transplanting it to places where it had never existed before. You were no longer just living on Mars. You were teaching Mars how to be alive. 6 months into your Martian existence, as you watched another alien sunset paint the sky in impossible colors while your vegetables grew in sterilized soil and your life support systems hummed their mechanical lullabies, something crystallized in your mind. This wasn't just humanity's backup plan. This was humanity's graduation exam. All those years of wondering if life had meaning, if your existence mattered, if you were just randomly assembled particles pretending to have purpose. It turns out you were asking exactly the right questions. Because consciousness that questions itself is consciousness that can adapt, evolve, and transplant itself across the cosmic void to places where consciousness has never existed before. You become living proof that the universe's greatest joke isn't that life is meaningless, but that life is so inherently meaningful that it can't help but spread itself to the most inhospitable places imaginable and somehow make them feel like home. You were no longer just humans who happen to be on Mars. You were Mars learning how to be human. Every morning when you check those life support systems, you're not just ensuring survival. You're participating in the universe's most ambitious art project, consciousness decorating reality with purpose, meaning, and the occasional really good joke about the absurdity of it all. And as Earth rises as a pale blue over the Martian horizon, you can't help but smile at the cosmic irony that the people who felt most disconnected from their home planet were exactly the ones humanity needed to create a new home among the stars. The universe is vast, strange, and mostly empty, but it's not meaningless anymore. Not as long as there are conscious beings willing to ask difficult questions, grow vegetables in impossible places, and find something to laugh about while doing it. Your story isn't ending. It's just changing planets. And somehow, that feels exactly right. What questions are you asking yourself right now? What impossible places might those questions be preparing you for? The universe is stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine, and you might just be exactly what needs next. Share your thoughts, because consciousness exploring itself through conversation might just be the most important technology we've ever developed.